Chapter 2791. Walking into the parking lot, she opened the car door and got in. Just as she was about to start the car, a black limousine passed by slowly from behind. The window of the back seat was open, and she could see the person in the back seat from where she was. That familiar side profile appeared once again. He was handsome, with a touch of coldness and elegance. Qin Chen's gaze froze. She couldn't look away until she couldn't see it anymore. When she wanted to chase after him, she had no strength in her legs, and her whole body was covered in hot sweat. She had never thought that one day, Rong Lei would become her nightmare. He appeared again and again. Was it someone else? Or was it her illusion? Because she was with Lan Yu, she always mistook others for him? Sitting in the car, Qin Shen took out a cigarette and smoked it slowly. She needed to calm down. At this moment, she actually hoped that it was just an illusion. She didn't know if this thought was because of Lan Yu or something else. With trembling hands, she took a drag of the cigarette. She told herself that she must have mistaken him for someone else. That person was gone. It was her guilt. It was because she didn't keep her promise that she felt that he was back. Her face rested against the window, and her gaze was a little hollow. She smoked furiously, one cigarette after another, and smoked furiously. She felt that she was sick and had a hallucination. It wasn't until the phone in the middle of the car rang that Qin Shen came back to her senses. It was a call from Qin Mu. She picked up the phone. Qin Mu's voice was gentle. "Qin Shen, are you coming? Dinner is ready." Qin Shen's gaze was a little indifferent. "I'll be there soon." "Okay," Qin Mu said. "Drive slowly." After hanging up, Qin Shen finished the cigarette in his hand and stepped on the accelerator. When they arrived at the villa where Qin Shen and Zhou Chengwang lived, it was already 8 o'clock at night. The night was cool, and the whole villa had a little warmth. Qin Shen walked into the hall. Zhou Chengwang was resting on the sofa, while Qin Mu was pacing back and forth with her belly in her hands. Later, Zhou Chengwang put down the magazine in his hand and pulled Qin Mu over to sit down. He placed his palm on her lower abdomen, gently caressing it. Qin Mu looked at him and smiled. That was the most ordinary happiness. Qin Shen was a little stunned as he watched. For so many years, she had always been alone. She had also seen many loving scenes of her parents and family, but she had never been moved. But now, she actually felt a little envious. Qin Mu looked up and found her standing there. She smiled faintly. "You're here. Dinner can be served." As she stood up, Zhou Chengwang naturally supported her and said in a low voice, "Walk slowly. I'm not made of glass." Qin Mu glanced at him and then came over to hold Qin Shen's arm. "I haven't seen you for a few days. Why have you lost weight? I heard from Cher that Lan Yu's cooking is very good. Why didn't he feed you more?" She reached out and pinched Qin Shen's face. She felt a little dull. He was originally thin, but now he looked even more haggard. Furthermore, Qin Mu could clearly smell the smell of cigarettes. She was stunned for a moment. "You smoked?" Qin nodded. "I was a little upset, so I smoked a few." Qin Mu snorted. "This smell is not just a few. Tell me, what happened?" Qin Shen went to wash his hands. "Nothing, just a little annoyed at work." "No way." Qin Mu pursed her lips. "Tell me the truth." Chapter 2792. The little guy could already sit in a small chair. Qin Mu asked someone to make him mashed potatoes and steamed eggs, which were delicious. Little Shui Mu ate happily. Qin Shen was a little absent-minded. She looked at Shui Mu for a long time and smiled. "You're so big now. You used to be a little monkey." She asked Zhou Chengwang, "How's your digestion?" "It's all good." There was tenderness in Zhou Chengwang's eyes. He first looked at Shui Mu and then at his wife. He likes Mu very much. He sleeps with Mu in his arms every night. Qin Shen smiled and said, "That's a good thing." Zhou Chengwang smiled slightly, and his eyes were full of love. Qin Shen lowered her head to eat, but it was obvious that the pregnant woman did not want to let her go. After repeated questioning, Qin Shen said in a daze, "Oh, I'm temporarily separated from Lan Yu. It's my problem." Qin Mu asked sharply, "Is it because you're separated from Lan Yu, or is it because of your smoking that you're separated from Lan Yu?" She beat around the bush, but Qin Shen still understood. After hesitating for a moment, she said in a low voice, "It's the latter." Qin Mu bit her lip and reached out to cover Qin Chen's hand. Chun Chun, so many years have passed, and I've never said anything. But now I know that you must not be able to get over it, so you're not sure if you and Lan Yu can always be together. You're afraid that he'll fall deeper and deeper, so you said that you want to separate for the time being, right? Qin Shen had always been smarter than Qin Mu. Qin Mu was always silly. At the age of 14, she fell in love with a man and couldn't extricate herself. She loved him crazily, and Qin Shen felt a lot guilty. But at this time, after experiencing so much, Qin Mu had a kind of calmness. Qin Shun had nowhere to hide. She looked at Qin Mu and sighed. Do you have to be like this, fiery eyes of truth? Qin Mu smiled. Who asked us to stay in the same place and hug each other for 10 months? Qin Chen said nothing. At this time, Zhou Chengwang was almost done with his meal. He took the initiative to leave with little Shuemu, giving them some privacy. Although they were all family, there were some words that were not convenient for a man like him to listen to, especially Qin Chen's arrogant temperament. After Zhou Chengwang left, Qin Chen looked at his back and then at Qin Mu. He smiled and said, You've trained him well. Qin Mu patted the back of her hand. Don't change the subject. Tell me what's going on. Qin Chen's gaze fell on Qin Mu's face. After a long time, he said, Qin Mu, I saw him. Him? Qin Mu pursed her lips and spat out a few words. Ronlei? This name was a taboo in the Qin family. No one dared to mention it for so many years. It was more taboo than the name of Cher, because Ronlei was dead and Qin Shun had frozen himself for so many years. The whole family was still very happy when she and Lan Yu were together. No matter what happened to Lan Yu, at least he was a decent person. Even if it was not for a long time, as long as it could make Qin Shen happy for a while, it was a good thing. It had to be said that this idea of the Qin family was not right. But they were not very optimistic about Lan Yu. After all, he had a grudge with Mu Yun and was married to Cher. Everyone in the Qin family was in a bad mood. It seemed that Qin Mu and Qin Chen's men all liked Cher. Forget about Zhou Chengwang. He just liked him, but Lan Yu was married. If he married Qin Shun, it would be strange. Moreover, no one would think that Qin Shun would get married. They all thought that Qin Shen was just doing it on a whim. But now, she was obviously serious. Her feelings for Lan Yu were not just for fun. Chapter 2793. Qin Shun pursed her lips and shook her head. I might have seen another person, but he looked very similar. So you're wavering, aren't you? Qin Mu put her hand on the back of Qin Shen's hand and asked in a low voice, What about Lan Yu? What did he say? He's angry. Qin Shun said softly. I sent him a message, but he didn't reply. Qin Mu smiled and said, Qin Shun, you're not the kind of person who will coax people casually, especially men. Qin Shen wouldn't have been willing to do it if it had been a flirting friend. But it was obvious that she cared about Lan Yu now, so she couldn't let it go. Qin Mu smiled and said, If you care, go and coax him back. Qin Shen, I can see that Lan Yu is sincere to you. If you like him, don't miss it. Qin Shen's expression was a little subtle. I'm afraid I can't give him happiness. Why don't you try? How do you know? Qin Mu's smile was very warm. Qin Shen, you've always been very smart, but if you want to come out, you have to accept something new. Only in this way can you get rid of the influence of Ronlei on you. Qin Shen's expression was a little dazed. Mumu, can I really do it? Could she abandon the faith that she had held for more than 10 years, just like that? After seeing that person, she felt very, very painful. She didn't want to bring her pain to Lan Yu. Qin Mu looked in her eyes and said, Let go a little bit and let Lan Yu come in. He will slowly infiltrate your life. The muscles on Qin Shen's face trembled a little. After a long time, she suddenly whispered, Mumu, I got it. She pursed her lips and said, Then I'll go first. Qin Mu grabbed her and said gently, Let the driver send you. Qin Shen hesitated for a moment and nodded. Qin Mu called the driver and personally sent Qin Shen to the car. Qin Shen sat in the car and seemed to be thinking about something. Her expression had never been so gentle. Qin Mu waved at her and watched the black limousine drive away. In the car, the driver asked softly, Where are you going, second miss? Qin Shen looked at the dark night outside and paused for a while before slowly telling him the name of Lan Yu's apartment. The driver nodded, turned the car around, and drove in that direction. In the villa, Zhou Chengwang approached slowly, took a knitted coat, and put it on Qin Mu's shoulder. It's cold at night. You've been standing for a long time. Let's go back. Qin Mu placed his hand on his shoulder and placed it on the back of his hand. He said softly, I'm a little worried about Qin Shun. Zhou Chengwang also looked into the distance, his gaze somewhat unreal. After a long time, he lowered his head and said, Is her past bothering her? Qin Mu nodded. Yes, that man's name is Ronglei, a very good-looking man. He is the heir of a French group, but 12 years ago, he jumped from the 22nd floor, and then her voice lowered and she murmured, Chun Chun became like this. She imitated Ronglei and turned herself into another Ronglei. Zhou Chengwang frowned. Qin Mu turned around and said lightly, Ronglei has a congenital heart disease. He is Qin Chen's patient. 12 years ago, how old was Qin Chen at that time? They grew up together. Ronglei is 8 years older than Qin Shun. At that time, he was already an adult, and Qin Shun was only 12 years old. Qin Mu sighed. Chengwang has been like this for the past 12 years. Chapter 2794. He rubbed her long hair. Don't worry. Call her over for dinner when you're free, and then call on you. Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. Then he thought of something. Tomorrow, meet with my big brother. Get him to investigate Ronglai's situation. Zhou Chengwang looked at her and said slowly, Mu, are you saying that Ronglei is not dead? I can't rule out this possibility. Otherwise, why does Qin Shin keep meeting that person? Do you think it's a coincidence? Or a conspiracy? Qin Mu raised her head and looked into his eyes. Zhou Chengwang thought for a moment and patted her little head. Now that you mention it, I think it's somewhat credible. He reached out and held her in his arms. Let's go back first. Your hands are cold. Qin Mu nodded and obediently went in with him. Zhou Chengwang carried her to the master bedroom upstairs and brought her a cup of warm water. Then he went to call Yi Muyan. The call went through. He spoke for about 5 minutes, and Qin Mu sat on the bed and looked at him. There was gentleness in her eyes, and the way she looked at him was different from before. In the past, Qin Mu looked at Zhou Chengwang with admiration, but now it was different. Now, they were equal and supporting each other. Such a life was plain but very warm. Qin Mu felt very satisfied. She looked at Zhou Chengwang walking over and smiled. What did my brother say? Zhou Chengwang walked over and sat down. His voice was a little low. Your brother said that people from the third world like Rong, Lei, can only be found through a special data network, and they might not be able to find him if he didn't use Rong Lei's identity in this world. Qin Mu looked at him with a puzzled look on her little face. If he's dead, we definitely won't be able to find anything. If he's alive, we might not be able to find anything either. Now we have to use all kinds of data to come up with an analysis. Zhou Chengwang sighed, but he's still alive. If he hasn't been seen for so long, I don't think he'll be easily found. Qin Mu lowered his eyes and nodded his head. Zhou Chengwang rubbed her hair. Don't worry. It depends on Qin Shen's heart. If she likes Lan Yu, no one can break them apart. As he spoke, he suddenly became serious. If Ronglei is really alive, I think he's probably not the Ronglei of the past, and he's not the person Qin Shen loves. If he really loves her, he wouldn't have made her suffer for so many years. I think so too. Qin Mu bit her lip and leaned her head in her husband's arms. Chengwang, I hope that Chen Shan can be with Lan Yu and live an ordinary life. Zhou Chengwang smiled bitterly. But Qin Shen is destined to be extraordinary. The advanced medical technology she mastered was destined to be extraordinary in her life. Zhou Chengwang suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. If that person was not dead and he came to find Qin Shen now, was it because of Qin Shen or Qin Shen's identity? He didn't know, and he didn't even dare to imagine. Just as he was guessing, Qin Shen yawned and said in a low voice, My feet are so sore. Zhou Chengwang wanted to interrupt her and then looked at the little face on his shoulder, which was as fresh as a painting. She looked at him and said, Zhou Chengwang, you haven't kissed me for a long time. Zhou Chengwang touched his forehead and couldn't help laughing. He said in a low voice, Mu. Qin Mu bit her lip. I want you to kiss me. Chapter 2795. Qin Mu blinked her eyes and placed her finger on her stomach. She said confidently, "It's the one in my stomach that pulled down my average age. So, Zhou Chengwang, I'm only 12 years old now." He pinched her little face. "Are you inviting me to kiss an underage girl?" He carefully laid her down and leaned over to look at her. His eyes were clear. "What I want to do may not be just a kiss. A 12-year-old girl. Are you sure you want me to?" Qin Mu closed her eyes slightly. Her long eyelashes were trembling. She tried her best to hold back her laughter. "I want to kiss and hug you. I'm still massaging your feet." She reached out and stretched out her feet to let him see her slightly swollen little feet. Her white and tender little feet were slightly swollen because of her pregnancy. They were like a little pig's hoof as they stretched out in front of him. All of a sudden, the little bit of charm in his heart vanished into thin air. He held her little feet and gently massaged them. "Is this okay?" Qin Mu closed her eyes comfortably and let him massage them. After one foot, he moved on to the other. Zhou Chengwang finished massaging both feet and gently put them down. Qin Mu seemed to have fallen asleep. He leaned over and said in a low voice, "Qin Mu." She opened her eyes in a daze and hugged his neck with her little hands. "Zhou Chengwang, are you done massaging?" She wanted to sleep because it was too comfortable. Zhou Chengwang bit her little ear fiercely. "You're done teasing me. Now let me go." "Then what do you want?" Qin Mu still had her eyes closed, but her little hands were busy unbuttoning his shirt. One button, two buttons, and then her little hands fell down. In an instant, she fell asleep. Mr. Zhou was originally full of passion. He hadn't been like this for a long time. Because she was pregnant, he didn't dare to mess around. She also didn't allow him to say that his body wasn't well. Tonight, he finally loosened up, but she fell asleep halfway. That hour of massaging her feet was for nothing. He stroked his forehead and smiled softly. In fact, it wasn't for nothing. Being with her, no matter what they did, they were always happy. Faintly, he felt very happy. The wine, women, and wealth that he once pursued seemed so pale in front of such a life. Zhou Chengwang smiled slightly and kissed the corner of her mouth. "Good night, Mumu." He covered her with the quilt and stroked their child through the quilt. The little guy was almost 5 months old and would be born in less than 4 months. Their lives would be more complete. Zhou Chengwang's heart was full. He felt that his heart was filled with happiness. He couldn't resist kissing Qin Mu again before quietly leaving the master bedroom and going to the children's room next door. Little Shui Mu had already been coaxed to sleep by the servants. His little face was clean and white, and he was quiet. Shui Mu had grown up a little, and his eyes had become more mature. He no longer looked like Qin Mu when he was young, but he could still see the shadow of Gu Mei. He used to be a little worried that Qin Mu would be unhappy. But sometimes, when he wasn't there, he would see Qin Mu smiling at Shui Mu, hugging him, kissing him. Qin Mu didn't seem to mind. She didn't mind, and neither did Zhou Chengwang. Gu Mei was their past, Shui Mu's mother. The past was the past, and Shui Mu was real. Zhou Chengwang sat on the edge of the small bed, quietly watching Shui Mu, occasionally thinking of Gu Mei. Chapter 2796. Zhou Chengwang watched until it was late at night. He kissed little Shui Mu's little face and walked out slowly to return to the room. Qin Mu slept soundly. She slept well, probably because she had missed a lot of sleep while taking care of him in the early stages of her pregnancy. He pursed his lips and reached out to touch her little face. Then, he went to take a shower and hugged her when his body was warm. Qin Mu woke up slightly and rubbed her little face against his shoulder. She said in a low voice, "You're back?" She knew that he had to visit little Shui Mu every night. He was a very good husband and father now. She wasn't angry because Shui Mu was their son now. In the future, she might never mention Gu Mei to Shui Mu. It wasn't because she was cruel, but because she wanted to protect him. Shui Mu should have a complete life, and Gu Mei probably wanted that too. Qin Mu rubbed her little face and said in a daze, "Chengwang, are you going to sleep?" He nodded and rubbed her little head. "Go to sleep." Qin Mu chuckled. "We haven't made love yet. Chengwang, are you feeling bad?" Her little hand moved down naughtily. Finally, she gasped. I've caught you. He had no choice but to kiss her little mouth. I'm fine. Moo, go to sleep. Be good. However, her little hand kept messing around. How would he fall asleep? His voice became slightly serious. Moo, stop playing. If you continue playing, you'll probably be broken. He looked at her sleepy and really didn't dare to touch her. He was afraid that he would wake up their child. Sometimes, Zhou Chengwang still had some obstacles. Because she was a girl, he seemed to feel guilty when he did that to Moo. However, he had never said such things. Moo didn't know that he would have such a perverted thought. As he said that, Moo pursed her lips, turned over, and kissed his lips. She said mischievously, I don't believe that you don't want to. He clearly wanted to, yet he was still pretending to be serious. She kissed him and placed her finger on his lips. Zhou Chengwang, you weren't like this in the past. You were always direct. Although he hadn't used it much in the past, if he wanted it, why would he have so many misgivings? Moo bit her lip and coughed softly. Don't tell me you can't do it anymore. These words were the biggest challenge to a man. Zhou Chengwang bit her lips. Is that what you think? Before Moo could answer, she suddenly cried out and bit his shoulder. Zhou Chengwang, you're so bad. He laughed lowly and began to bully her. She was pregnant, so he didn't dare to use force. He only dared to do it gently. She was like a little kitten. After a long time, she grabbed his shoulder and cried softly, Zhou Chengwang. Of course, he knew what was wrong with her. He coaxed her, okay, be good. You have to take it slow when you're pregnant. It won't be good if you hurt the child. In fact, it was harder for him to hold it in than her. He had been holding in for a long time, and now that he had let it go, how could he be satisfied just like that? But for the sake of the child, he still gave it to her gently once. After that, she closed her eyes slightly to calm down, and he kept kissing her little face to appease her. She was longer than before, and it took a long time for her to calm down. His heart was full of love. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Moo, I'm going to the bathroom. Moo was a little surprised. She looked at him and said, Zhou Chengwang. He smiled bitterly and kissed her. I'm fine. I'll be back to accompany you in a while. Chapter 2797. Moo bit her lip and reached out to pull him, but he had already walked toward the bathroom. He was walking in a hurry, as if he was in a hurry. Moo leaned against the head of the bed and suddenly bit the quilt with a faint smile. She suddenly felt that he was very cute. Then she held her stomach and walked toward the bathroom under the warm yellow light. She gently opened the bathroom door and saw Zhou Chengwang standing under the shower, doing what all men would do. Moo's face was a little hot. Although they were husband and wife, she was sure that no man would like his wife to see such a scene. Biting her lip, she walked over, hugged him from behind, and kissed his back. Let me do it. Zhou Chengwang's body froze, and he asked uncertainly, Moo. Her little face was pressed against his back, and there was only a round belly between them. Her little hand moved down, intending to please him. But after all, she didn't do such a thing. Not only did Zhou Chengwang not feel happy, but he also felt a little pain. His voice became hoarser as he called her name, Moo. Although it was painful, his heart was filled with joy. Moo's face was extremely hot. She had been buried behind his back, and under his lead, her little hands slowly began to feel something. Zhou Chengwang panted lightly, raised his head slightly, and took a deep breath. Moo, you make me feel that this kind of pleasure is a little sinful. With that, he pulled her in front of him, looked at her gently, and kissed the corner of her mouth. You're my wife. I should cherish you. Moo clung to his body and rested her face on his shoulder. Her body was drenched in the warm water with him. As she kissed him, she murmured, You're my husband. Isn't it normal to please you? With that, she looked up at him. Zhou Chengwang did the same. Their eyes met, and there was an indescribable feeling in them. Under his gaze, Moo slowly squatted down. In the next second, Zhou Chengwang snorted in embarrassment. He gently stroked his wife's little face and snorted happily, Moo. She ignored him and focused on pleasing him. Zhou Chengwang groaned in embarrassment. In the end, he pulled her up and held her in his arms. She could feel his racing heartbeat. She chuckled mischievously and poked his shoulder. "Do you like it, Mr. Zhou?" Zhou Chengwang calmed down for a while before saying in a low, hoarse voice, "I like it. I like it very much. Any man would like his wife to do this. This would definitely satisfy all the wild imaginations of men." Zhou Chengwang did not expect that Qin Mu would be willing to do this for him. In the past, they were at their best, but after he disappointed her, she was still willing. He hugged her. His heart was beating fast, but he was also moved. Qin Mu let go of everything. She had let go of everything. What else could he not let go of? He gently hugged his little wife and looked up. His eyes seemed to contain billions of stars, but also seemed to contain only Qin Mu. They hugged each other quietly. It was such an intense love affair, but in the end, they calmed down and their hearts were even more satisfied. Perhaps this was what happiness was like. Zhou Chengwang lowered his head and kissed Qin Mu's belly. He smiled and said, "Little one, it's time to sleep." In the dark night. Chapter 2798. Dark Night. Qin Shin sat in the back seat of the limousine and looked at the dark night outside quietly. The streets of B City were bustling with lights like a long dragon, but in her eyes it was lonely. Her heart was empty. After a long time, she felt that the emptiness was loneliness, because she had become a person again, and there was no one to accompany her. She pursed her beautiful thin lips and turned to look at the driver in the front. "Uncle Zhao, drive faster." Old Zhao smiled. "Second miss, this car is already very fast. If it goes faster, Uncle Zhao will have to give you a ticket." Qin Shin didn't speak anymore, but Uncle Zhao's chatterbox seemed to be opened. He didn't want to give up this opportunity to chat. "Second miss, are you going to find a boyfriend?" Qin Shin looked at him indifferently and didn't say anything for a long time. Old Zhao thought that she wouldn't answer. This second miss was too cold. She usually made herself like a man. The most important thing was that she didn't talk much. When she had something to say, it wasn't a good thing. But after a while, Qin Shin said with a faint tone, "Yes." Old Zhao was shocked. The well-equipped limousine floated for a moment, but he quickly returned to the right track and smiled. "No wonder second miss is so anxious." "Anxious?" Qin Shin couldn't help but refute. "Uncle Zhao, isn't this word used to describe men?" Old Zhao smiled again. "Second miss, look at you from head to toe. If you don't look like a man, are you a woman?" In the whole Qin family, only old Zhao dared to say such words. Qin Shin glared at him for a long time, but it was useless. Old Zhao's trick succeeded. He smiled with satisfaction and brainwashed her. "Second miss, men like girls with long hair and wearing skirts. It's okay for the time being, but it won't last long." Old Zhao smiled mysteriously. "I think Mr. Lon and second miss are already prepared to be a prostitute, but the result may be an unexpected surprise." The more old Zhao talked, the more excited he became. The most important thing between a husband and wife is trust and honesty. Trust is a matter of the spiritual level, but honesty is different. It's a matter of flesh and blood. Say, when people are together, they can't hide it, right? Otherwise, if we do that, we'll have to, what's that? Old Zhao picked up a glass of water and took a sip. Sometimes, there's an extra layer of gauze, which adds a layer of beauty to it. That's what's popular now. This year's Victoria's Secret fashion show is being held in H City. Look at those fat and skinny women. When they put on those clothes, all of them look different. Look at those big, long legs, that chest, that waist. Even men who have lost their virginity can be revived. It's like an aphrodisiac. Qin Shin couldn't help but ask, "Uncle Zhao, does Annie Zhao know that you're obsessed with these fairies?" Looking is just looking. How can I be infatuated with it?" In my heart, Annie Zhao is still the most beautiful. She's just wearing a sweatshirt and pants, and I feel that she's mighty and domineering. Then, old Zhao said with some embarrassment, then I automatically lay flat on the ground. Qin Shin was stunned. He didn't know what to say. It turned out that Uncle Zhao was still a little submissive. However, with old Zhao's nonsense, he was not as anxious as before. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of Lan Yu's villa. Qin Shin got out of the car and walked a few steps before coming back. He told old Zhao, "Drive back. I won't be coming back tonight. Old Zhao gave a thumbs up. Second miss is mighty. Chapter 2799. Qinshan couldn't help but roll her eyes. She waved at Lao Zhao and walked in quickly. After entering, she wondered why the door was open. But soon, she found a red Ferrari sports car in the parking lot in front of her. Qinshan recognized that model. It was a global limited edition car that the rich second generation and the G second generation loved. And most of the red ones were women. Someone who had a relationship with Lan Yu, who could drive a limited edition car that cost tens of millions, and who had a flamboyant personality, Qinshan felt that the range could be narrowed down to one person. She pursed her lips tightly. Originally, she could pretend that nothing had happened and leave this place. Then, she would completely separate from Lan Yu. But at this moment, there was a hint of unwillingness in her heart. She walked slowly into the foyer. The lights were on everywhere, but the first floor was empty. And upstairs, there was an undeniable moaning sound of a man and a woman screaming and panting. Qinshan lifted her feet and shrank back. At this moment, she thought of Lao Zhao's words. Men all liked little vixens who wore thin clothes. Lan Yu was no exception. Qinshan stood downstairs quietly for about a minute. She still went upstairs. She walked through the corridor. The light shone on her face, bright and dark. She walked to the door of the master bedroom on the second floor and saw a mess on the floor. Lan Yu's trousers, Lan Yu's shirt, Lan Yu's belt, and the women's dresses were stacked together warmly. And on the luxurious bed, the big bed that she and Lan Yu had spent the whole night together, there was someone else. Lan Yu leaned against the headboard. Qinshan thought that she should be glad that he still had an extra pair of underwear on him, but didn't have time to have sex. It was her who came at the wrong time, and in his arms, from the back, was really a little stunner who could spit fire. She was wearing a fiery red chiffon that reflected the white snow. She was small and delicate, but there were places where she should be. Her body was faintly discernible. This was the kind of extreme seduction that Uncle Zhao had mentioned. Qinshan didn't need to look at her face to know that it was Lin Cece. There was no expression on Qinshan's face. She just quietly watched them kiss and entangle with each other. About a minute later, Lan Yu suddenly raised his eyes and looked at Qinshan in shock. His face turned deathly pale in that instant, and he stared at her with a death stare. His body stiffened, and he forgot to push Lin Cece away, allowing her to kiss him. Qinshan chuckled. Sorry to bother you. At this moment, Lin Cece turned her head. That smile was very charming. She touched Lan Yu's body with her fingers and said sweetly, Dr. Qin, it was you who didn't want Lan Yu. I'm just here to have a drink with him. So, they rolled onto the bed, right? Qinshan didn't pay attention to Lin Cece. He just looked at Lan Yu and said calmly, Are you drunk? Lan Yu slightly closed his eyes. No. Then did she drug you? Qinshan's expression became extremely cold and calmer. But this calmness was a little suffocating. It was as if she had made a big decision. Lan Yu didn't speak for a long time. Qinshan smiled faintly and sadly. Did she? Lan Yu smiled bitterly and pushed Lin Cece away. He got off the bed and walked to Qinshan. Chapter 2800. And he did drink a little and was slightly drunk, but not so drunk that he didn't know who the woman on the bed was. He was with Lin Cece because he wanted to give up on Qinshan, because he was a little tired. So, he tried it with the woman who came to him. He wanted to see if he was interested in other women. But after lying in bed for half an hour, he wasn't excited. But he couldn't tell Qinshan about this. He couldn't tell her, Qinshan, I found someone else because I wanted to give up on you. He would rather let her believe that it was because of loneliness. Lan Yu let out a long sigh and looked into her eyes. No. Qinshan's eyes were locked on him. After about 5 seconds, she smiled and said, You guys can continue. With that, she walked quickly to the stairs. She couldn't stay here for a moment longer. Lan Yu grabbed her arm. Qinshan. She struggled to free herself from his grip, but was unable to do so. She slowly turned around and looked at him. Lan Yu, let's part on good terms. You have things you can't accept, and, similarly, I have things I can't accept. He was still holding her, unwilling to let go. He just said in a low voice, I'm sorry, Qinshan. I promise I won't do it again. He didn't like Lin Cece, but he wanted to give up on Qin Shun. This was an indisputable fact. He was sorry to him for wanting to give up on him, not Lin Cece. He had no interest in Lin Cece at all. His refusal to let go finally made Qin Shun angry. She raised her hand and slapped him. A 5-fingered handprint immediately appeared on Lan Yu's face. He turned his face away. He looked a little embarrassed, but more than that, he was embarrassed. Qin Shun's face was very cold. Don't think that I can forgive you for cheating on me, like Zhou Chengguang. Lan Yu, I'm not such a magnanimous person. With that, she went straight downstairs. This time, Lan Yu didn't catch her. He just watched her leave and felt that all the strength in his body was drained. This time, he seemed to have really lost her. At this time, Lin Cece came over. She had already put on her clothes and was holding a small bag. She walked over and chuckled. As expected, men can't stand loneliness. In fact, she clearly knew that this man did not have any feelings for her. He was just confused. He only wanted to give up because he was in pain. He succeeded, and she of course succeeded as well. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes. Did you call her to come? Lin Cece smiled sweetly and then bit her delicate nails. I didn't. She came so late, probably because she wanted to make up with you. Maybe she would agree if you proposed to get engaged, but unfortunately, Lin Cece's slender fingers slid on his shoulder. You messed it all up. Dr. Qin is a clean freak and a proud person. You should know it best. It was not easy for her to accept you, a second-hand good. Now, Lin Cece's face was right in front of his. Lan Yu, you've been struck out. It was just a small trick, and it had killed him. How useless. Next, she had to focus on dealing with Rong Lei. Unlike Lan Yu, that man's personality was the same as Qin Shun's. She thought that it would be easier to deal with such a man than Lan Yu. Chapter 28:01. After Lin Cece left, Lan Yu began to call Qin Shun, but the phone rang over and over again, but she didn't answer. Lan Yu casually put on his clothes, walked to the door of the villa, and asked the guard, "How did Dr. Qin come?" The guard said very carefully, "He was sent here by a black limousine." After Dr. Qin came, the car left. Lan Yu scratched his hair and cursed in a low voice. Damn it. He narrowed his eyes, went straight back to the villa, took the car key, got in the car, and drove out. It was very late at night. Lan Yu drove and looked for her in the night. With her personality, she probably needed to calm down at this time. She didn't want to see anyone, and she would also be proud to not want anyone to pick her up. Not everyone could see Qin Shun's tears. He just knew that she would cry. Lin Cece's words kept replaying in his mind. For Qin Shun to come so late at night, there was no other reason other than to reconcile. Lan Yu pursed his lips. Apart from being anxious, he was most worried about her safety. He looked for her bit by bit, and finally, 2 hours later, he found her in a suburban park. Qin Shun sat there, smoking quietly. Her smoking posture was more languid and good-looking than a man's. Lan Yu sat in the car and looked at her quietly. She also noticed him. She didn't stop smoking. She just looked at him and had no intention of running away. This was his Qin Shun. After a long time, Lan Yu got out of the car and walked towards her in the night. However, Qin Shun patted the dust on his body and walked forward, as if he didn't exist. Lan Yu frowned. Qin Shun, I can explain. No need. Qin Shun turned around and looked at him under the moonlight. Lan Yu, I want to please you and say that we made up, but there's no need. She gave a self-deprecating laugh. Originally, we were forced to be together, but now it's just right. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and stared at her. Do you really think so? Qin Shun smiled faintly. Yes. Lan Yu, you see, we can't trust each other unconditionally. No matter what you and Lin Cece did or didn't do today, in my eyes, it's still a betrayal. Lan Yu's breathing hurt. He stared into her eyes. Qin Shun, give me another chance. No more. Qin Shun said very softly, once is enough. She took a step back and smiled. Actually, you can find a normal girl to fall in love with. I've said it before, we can't get along. I can't give you anything. Therefore, it was right to say that they should separate now. As for him, he would probably be sad for a while, but not long after, Li Cece and Wang Cece would appear. A handsome, talented, and rich man would never lack women. She was just his obsession for a while. It would be fine once it was over. Lin Cece's appearance on his bed was the best proof. Qin Shin lowered her eyes and looked at his toes as he took another step forward. She said in a low voice, "Lan Yu, don't come any closer. We're done. Is that so?" He punched the wall beside him. There was a heavy sound. She almost suspected that he had smashed the bones in his hand. She suppressed the sourness in her heart. "Lan Yu, it's just a breakup. There's no need to do this." There were a few drops of warm blood on her face. That was Lan Yu's blood. Chapter 28:02. With that, she turned around and walked into the distance. Her back was straight, and she didn't allow herself to look back. "Qin Shun, let's just end it like this. You won't be upset anymore, and you won't worry about gains and losses anymore." Uncle Zhao was right. All men liked little vixens, and she wouldn't turn herself into that for some man. She was Qin Shun. She couldn't do it. She walked slowly. Her heart trembled with every step she took. Only then did she realize that feelings could be so hurtful. She thought that her heart wouldn't hurt anymore. It turned out that there was such a heart-wrenching pain in addition to pain. However, she didn't want to stay with such a man. It was meaningless to force it. Behind her, Lan Yu's voice came. "Qin Shun, you don't make trouble because you don't have a heart." Her body paused for a moment, and then she walked forward again. But she didn't take a few steps before she was hugged from behind. Qin Shun was shocked and angry. He didn't move, but said coldly, "What are you doing, Lan Yu?" Her body was turned around. Under the moonlight, she saw his cold, handsome face. Lan Yu said softly, "You want to break up? If you want to break up, then make it clear. We've already made it clear. You and Lin Cece were in bed and almost had no clothes. Lan Yu, how much more clear do you want to make it?" Qin Shin looked at his words and sneered. "Or do you think that you haven't completely taken her yet, so you're still innocent? You just took off your clothes and chatted with her?" Lan Yu's face was a little embarrassed. After a while, he said hoarsely, "Shit is not important. Lan Yu, there's no need for us to quarrel." She said tiredly, "Let me go, otherwise..." "Otherwise what?" Lan Yu's face was a little ugly. He looked at her and said hoarsely, "Qin Shun, you should know that my temper isn't that good. Otherwise, nothing much." Qin Shun squeezed out a sentence and began to struggle. Lan Yu knew that she practiced karate, so he directly hugged her, not letting her struggle, not giving her a chance to escape. He almost half-forcefully dragged her into his car and pressed her into the back seat. Qin Shin was lying on his back with Lan Yu on top of him. In the narrow carriage, because of the contact between the man and the woman, the air became warm. Qin Shin raised his leg and wanted to kick him, but he was firmly held down. A man's strength was superior to a woman's, so her moves were completely useless against him. The back of his hand was injured, and the smell of blood was even more obvious in the car. Qin Shin glared at him. "Lan Yu, do you want to rape me? If you insist on breaking up, then I don't mind using this method to make you change your mind." His eyes were dark and his voice was unbelievably hoarse. Qin Shin looked at him and said in a very low voice, "If you do that, it will be impossible for us to be together again. It will be impossible for us now." Lan Yu's fingers gently stroked her lips. Because his fingers were stained with blood, her lips were dyed even redder. There was also blood at the corner of his mouth, which made him look very extravagant. Qin Shin looked up at him, feeling as if she had never known this man before, and his voice was even lower. "If I can have you again now, why wouldn't I do it?" Chapter 28:03. Qin Shun didn't resist. She just lay there quietly. Lan Yu was very rough, like a violent storm. He had never been so rough. The fresh blood was like the strongest medicine in the village, burning away all of his rationality. He took her in the most brutal way. Qin Shun was in pain, but she just bit her lip and didn't say anything else. She didn't even cry out in pain, nor did she tell him. After it was over, she lay there for a while before saying softly, "Can you let me go now?" Lan Yu rolled to the side and sat up, looking at her body in the dark. He knew how rough he was just now, and he also knew that she was in pain. His voice was hoarse. "Why didn't you resist? Is it useful?" Qin Shin said coldly, then sat up. She looked at her own shirt, then picked up the shirt he had left at the side and put it on. She took out her phone and dialed Yi Muyun's number. "Brother, asked the driver to pick me up. I'm at." Before she could finish, the phone was hung up. Lan Yu's face was a little pale. He knew the purpose of the call too well. She didn't want someone to pick her up, but she wanted Yi Muyun to intervene in their relationship and stop him from looking for her again. Did she loathe him to such an extent? When he asked this question unconsciously, he became more clear-headed. Qin Shen's voice was very soft. "Yes." Lan Yu let out a long breath, stared at her, and said very slowly, "Qin Shen, I really don't have a chance?" "Yes, you don't." She picked up the phone. Before she opened the car door and got out, she said softly, "You can look for Lin Cece, really." It would have been better if she hadn't said this, but when she said it, Lan Yu was a little angry. He pinched her chin and said in a low voice, "Do you really think so?" "Yes." Qin Shen's voice was very soft, but it was very firm. Lan Yu kept looking at her and suddenly said, "Qin Shen, you don't love me. If you love someone, how could you give up so easily and not care so much?" How could he say such a thing? He was wrong, but what hurt him more was that she didn't love him. From the beginning, he knew that Qin Shen was like a mystery. He wanted to solve this mystery himself, but now it seemed that it was not necessary. Lan Yu's voice calmed down. "I'll send you back." He paused for a moment before continuing, speaking slowly and deeply. "Qin Shen, I don't have any protection today, and you're not in your safe period either. If you don't want to give birth to a child who doesn't love a man, you'd better take the medicine. Also, don't worry, I won't bother you anymore." As he spoke, his breathing was painful, but he still finished it in one breath. Qin Shen lowered his eyes and pursed his lips. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Okay." Lan Yu stared at her for a long time before climbing to the front to start the car. He opened the car window and blew away the smell inside. However, he smoked. As he drove, he smoked one cigarette after another. When the car stopped, it was at the entrance of a 24-hour pharmacy. Qin Shen looked outside, and for the first time, she revealed a look of vulnerability. She knew that he wanted to buy the medicine. Personally, would he feel at ease like this? Lan Yu opened the car door and got out, ignoring the fact that he was naked and that there were some messy scars on his body. He walked into the shop and asked for the morning after medicine. The shop assistant looked at him and sighed in her heart. He really turned hostile the moment he got out of bed. This medicine shouldn't be taken casually. It's not good for women. Lan Yu took the medicine, paid for it, and turned to leave. The shop assistant thought for a moment and took a step forward. He wanted to tell him that the medicine was fake and that their boss was a black-hearted boss. However, the car window rolled down and a man's face appeared. He was wearing a black shirt that was obviously a size too big. The shop assistant muttered, "Why would a man need to take medicine? He can't get pregnant anyway, as long as he doesn't die." Chapter 2804. With that thought in mind, the shop assistant felt much more at ease. Men wouldn't get pregnant anyway. She had never heard of a little tadpole sprouting from there. However, the man sitting in the back seat was really handsome. If it were her, she would also be moved. It was an old woman in her 50s. She held her wrinkled face, and her eyes were pink, which didn't match her age. Lan Yu walked over, opened the car door, and sat down. Qin Shen reached out to take the medicine and opened it. It was to be taken in one go and didn't need to be taken twice. She put the medicine in her mouth and swallowed it. There was a sweet taste at first, then a bitter taste spread in her mouth, just like her relationship with Lan Yu. She pursed her lips, and a pained expression appeared on her face. Lan Yu frowned. "Why aren't you drinking water?" He went to the front seat, but couldn't find it. Qin Shen's tone was indifferent. "I don't need it. I've already eaten." She leaned her head against the back seat and said tiredly, "Take me home. I'm a little tired." Lan Yu's handsome face twitched slightly, but he didn't say anything. He just stared at her. After a long time, he finally pursed his lips and started the car. This time, the car drove very fast at the speed of lightning and thunder. Lan Yu gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his veins popped out. Qin Shen sat in the back seat and felt a little dizzy, but she didn't say anything. She held it in until the car stopped at the entrance of the condominium. As soon as the car stopped, she got out without hesitation. Since they had already broken up, there was no need to pester her anymore. She was determined. Lanyu originally felt that there was no need to pester her anymore, but he still couldn't help but open the car door and get out. He called out, "Chun Chun, don't you even know how to say goodbye?" Chen's body froze. After a long time, she turned her head and said softly, "Because we won't see each other again." She had already decided to go back to New York and would leave in a week at the latest. Lanyu was already in the past. She felt that no matter if it was Lanyu or Ronglei, it was all in the past. She should forget about them. After she finished speaking, she stared at him for about 2 seconds before turning around and slowly walking into the apartment. There was no trace of nostalgia. Lanyu took out a cigarette in frustration. He wanted to smoke, but then he looked in the direction where Qin Shun had left. He knew in his heart that he was the reason why she broke up with him, but even now, he wasn't sure if he had ever been in her heart. He was somewhat self-deprecating. This kind of thinking was just like a woman, but he couldn't control it. At this moment, if he didn't do anything, he would feel even more empty than this emptiness. He pursed his thin lips and finally walked over. Qin Shun was pressed against the wall with both hands above her head. Her lips were passionately sealed. This kiss was like a raging fire. Qin Shun didn't resist, because a kiss wouldn't change anything. Lanyu wasn't that naive. Indeed, after a minute, he pulled back and pressed his thin lips against hers. He said in a low and husky voice, "Qin Shun, have you ever felt anything for me? Just a little bit?" "No." Qin Shun's eyes looked straight at him without a trace of hesitation. Lanyu's face instantly turned ashen. He stared into her eyes and stared at them for a long time before letting out a sigh. "I think so too." He slowly let go of her and took a few steps back. "Let's just leave it at that. It's good to be apart." Chapter 28:05. She watched as he turned the car around and left very quickly. Then she heard the sound of the sports car starting up. It had only driven for a few dozen meters when it crashed somewhere with a loud bang. Qin Shun ran out and saw that his car had crashed into a street lamp. The front of the car was damaged. He should be fine. The car door opened, and Lanyu was sitting in the car. Seeing her come out, he looked at her and said in a calm tone, "Dr. Qin, do you still care about me?" He lowered his eyes and said, "Don't worry, I won't be that stupid vegetable anymore." Qin Shun's gaze was a little clear. Then, he walked towards the elevator without a trace of reluctance. Lanyu got out of the car and looked at the front of the car. The car was probably damaged. He sat in the car and smoked one cigarette after another. After he was done, he called his secretary to take care of the car. Then he got out of the car and slowly walked out of the neighborhood. Slowly, he left her. When Qin Shun returned to her apartment, she didn't rest but went straight to the changing room. She opened a big suitcase and started to crazily put clothes in it. She didn't know what she was doing. She just did it subconsciously. While she was pretending, she started to cry. She rarely cried, especially in the past few years. She leaned in front of the suitcase and cried silently. She told herself that it would be fine if she cried once. The sun shone on every corner of the exquisitely decorated apartment, but it didn't shine into her heart. When she came back to her senses, she hung the clothes back one by one. She didn't want to let a man affect her again. In the past, Ronglei was enough. She really didn't need Lanyu. Just as Qin Shun was packing, the landline at home rang. Then, she remembered that she had left her phone in Lanyu's car. Or maybe he had thrown it away. She despised Lanyu in her heart. Not only did he cheat on her, but he also had such a bad temper. She went out to pick up the phone. It was from the hospital. The hospital director called him personally. "Dr. Qin, I know that you've been in a bad mood recently, so we haven't arranged any surgeries." Yes. Of course, Dr. Qin isn't on the payroll right now. However, the patient today has a very powerful background, and his condition is very thorny. Do you want to come to the hospital and have a consultation with the chief doctors of our hospital? Qin Shun paused for a moment and then agreed. She changed her clothes. When she changed into her favorite gray shirt and black trousers, she thought of Lin Cici's seductive body again. A mocking smile appeared at the corners of her mouth. She went downstairs and drove the white Lamborghini sports car to the parking lot. In the hospital, even the cordon was pulled. It was as if they were facing a formidable enemy, but at the same time, it was like a distinguished guest had arrived. However, no matter how distinguished the people who came to the hospital were, they were still patients. Qinshan opened the car door and walked towards the outpatient building of the hospital. On the first floor, a young nurse came up to him with a peach blossom on her face. "The patient today is very important. Dr. Qin, you have to take a good look," the nurse said, blushing even more. Qinshan looked at her and said calmly, "I don't know what illness that person has, but I know what it is from your appearance." The nurse covered her face. "Dr. Qin." Qinshan shook his head and smiled. Although he was smiling, it didn't reach his eyes. In the elevator, the nurse asked softly, "Dr. Qin, are you in a bad mood?" Qinshan nodded. Chapter 28:06. Qinshan looked at her and smiled lazily. "How handsome must he be to make you like this?" The nurse covered her face again. "You'll know when you see him." Qinshan pursed her lips and didn't say anything else. When they reached the 6th floor, the elevator door opened. The nurse walked in front of them, and she wanted to clear the way for Dr. Qin. Although the patient today was very handsome, Dr. Qin wasn't bad either. When they reached the VIP room, the nurse slowly pushed the door open for her. When the door opened, there were many people inside. The director, the deputy director, and even the distinguished Mr. Lin were there. However, Qinshan's eyes only fell on the slender figure. He was facing away from her, but that figure and the aura he exuded made her heart tighten and her soul tremble. The memories of their youth rolled back like a rewind. In his mind, an image kept appearing. In the suburbs of France, there was an endless sun. 12-year-old Chun was running in it. In front of her stood a slender figure. That was the person she yearned for, the person she had been chasing. Ronglei. Ronglei. Qinshan stood there and subconsciously called this name. She was like a nightmare, staring at the man who was facing away from her. The director came over. "Little Qin, what's wrong with you? You don't look very well." Qinshan ignored him. Her eyes were still on the man in front of her. Ronglei. Was it him? Was it him in the previous 2 encounters? Was he still alive? Qinshan wanted to say something, but her lips moved, but she couldn't say a word. Finally, the man turned around. It was a familiar face with the same magnificence, but it was a little more mature than before. He said indifferently, "Qin, long time no see." Qinshan looked at him, her eyes very straight. At this moment, she seemed to have returned to the sea of flowers in France, as if she had returned to the time when she was 12 years old and purely liked someone. At that time, she was still a little girl. At this moment, she looked at the man in front of her with the eyes of a little girl. Ronglei slowly stepped forward, stretched out his beautiful slender hand, and placed it on Qinshan's forehead, helping her tidy up her hair. His voice was incredibly gentle. "Aren't you happy to see me?" "Qinshan." When he called her that, she came back to her senses a little. It seemed that there were others who called her that. Qinshan's eyes slowly became clear. Finally, she said in a hoarse voice, "Ronglei, it's me." Ronglei's fingers slowly stroked her hair. His voice was slightly husky and charming. "My Chun, how did you become like this?" All the female nurses and doctors were stunned. "Her voice is so beautiful. But my Chun? Oh my God, did Dr. Qin and the man in front of him have a one-night stand?" Looking at them standing together, it was really pleasing to the eye. Moreover, Dr. Qin's gaze had never been so gentle, Mr. Rong and Dr. Qin were like the head of a family and a little attendant. They looked so loving. Qinshan finally came back to her senses. She said calmly, "Because that person, he is no longer here." The next second, she was pulled into Ronglei's arms. The warmth drove away the coldness of the past. Ronglei rested his chin on her hair, and his voice was a little hoarse. "Now, he is back. Chun, he is back, and he will never leave again." Qinshan's gaze was shallow. "Really?" Chapter 28:07. Qinshan stood upright. She did not react, nor could she react. The person who had died in her heart for 12 years, had come back to life at this moment. At this moment, he was here, at the entrance of the VIP room. Lanyu stood quietly with his hand wrapped in gauze. He watched quietly, watching her being hugged and kissed by someone else. The corner of his mouth showed a hint of coldness. That man, his name was Ronglei. At this moment, was he acting out some romantic love story? It was so beautiful that it did not seem real. It really made him feel pain in his heart. It was painful, very painful, but this kind of pain was also a kind of relief. It turned out that she had been waiting for such a man. It turned out that when she said that she wanted to separate temporarily, it was because this man came back that she wavered. Lin Cece said that she went over that night because she wanted to make up with him. Now it seemed that it was really ironic. Qin Shun said that she had never fallen for him. He originally thought that she said that because she was proud. Now that he thought about it, he was really stupid. Lanyu laughed at himself and wanted to look away. Qin Shin suddenly turned her head. She looked at Lanyu with a pale face. Lanyu pursed his lips into a beautiful arc. Then he chuckled and said, "Congratulations." After that, he took his medicine and walked straight away. He did not look at her again. Qin Shin looked at him, and her cheeks trembled slightly. She looked at the direction in which Lanyu left, and her feet involuntarily took a step forward. Then, Ronglei held her in his arms again. He rested his chin on her shoulder and said gently, "Qin Shun, I missed you very much." Qin Shin stood still, her fingers quietly clenched into fists. She seemed to have gotten everything she had dreamed of, but also seemed to have lost something. This kind of gain did not make her happy. Instead, her heart was empty, and there was an indescribable feeling an hour later. Qin Shin sat by the swimming pool of a luxurious villa. Beside him was a bowl of fruit juice that was delivered by a servant by air. Behind him was a row of servants waiting to serve him. In the swimming pool, the man in black swimming trunks had already swum several laps. Qin Shin looked at him in a daze. Ronglei's tall and sturdy body walked to the edge of the pool, and the servant immediately took a bath towel and prepared to dry him. Ronglei took it, wiped it by himself, walked to Qin Shin's side, and sat down. His well-built body had just the right amount of muscles, especially his six-pack, which was wrapped like velvet, exuding an enchanting luster. To use one word to describe it, it would be men and women. To use 4 words to describe it, it was a man, a woman, and a woman. He had always been handsome, but now, in addition to his maturity, there was also a hint of domineering aura. Qin Shin had grown up with him, but at this moment, he felt like a stranger. He was clearly the same as before, and he also called her Qin Shun. He was as intimate as before, but she just felt that something was different. Ronglei took the juice and placed it in front of her. "Why aren't you drinking?" Qin Shin shook her head. "I'm not too thirsty." "Qin Shun, you used to like this the most." Ronglei didn't mind and put it down. Then he asked casually, "That man today, is he your friend? Or is he wooing you?" Qin Shin looked at him for a while before she lowered her eyes. "He was just a patient. Now he's not. It's already no longer relevant." Chapter 28:08. Ronglei didn't ask anymore. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Then he reached out and stroked her hair. "Since it's just an ordinary patient, there's no need for us to meet again." Qin Shin didn't say anything else. She just looked into the distance. Her gaze was clear. Ronglei's gaze fell on her neck. There was an obvious hickey there. It was very fresh. It was obvious that it was left not long ago. His dark eyes were dyed with a storm, but it was extinguished in an instant. Qin Shun turned her head and looked at his face. "Ronglei, why did you go to the hospital? He was clearly in good health. There was nothing wrong with him at all. Why did he lie to her?" Ronglei smiled. "Because I wanted to see you. Qin Shin, I thought of many ways to appear in front of you. But in the end, someone told me to give a girl a surprise. You see, you were surprised and also a little happy, right?" Qin Shin didn't say anything. She just looked into his eyes as if she was examining something. Ronglei's handsome face leaned over and asked with a smile, "What are you looking at, Qin Shun?" Qin Shin's voice was very slow. "Ronglei, You haven't told me why you're still alive. Rong Lei's eyes flickered. After a moment, he asked, Are you unhappy? No. Her voice was a little weak. Sorry, this is probably an occupational disease of doctors. Rong Lei lay down and looked up. His voice was very soft. If I said that I slept for 10 years, would you believe me? Qinshan? It took me 2 years to recover. His hand followed and grabbed her hand. He dragged her to lie down side by side with him. He naturally hugged her sideways, brushed the hair in front of her forehead, and gazed at her. The row of servants at the back had good eyesight and quickly retreated in unison. There were only the two of them left in the huge swimming pool. Qinshan felt a little uncomfortable being hugged by him like this. She lowered her voice. Rong Lei, I don't know. Sorry, I was rude. There's nothing wrong if you don't know. His voice was gentle, and his gaze was gentle as he stared at her. Qinshan, I never thought that you would become a genius doctor one day. Qinshan looked at him and smiled faintly. Rong Lei slowly tightened his grip on her and held her in his arms. They liked each other when they were young, but they never had physical contact. After all, Qinshan was only 12 years old at that time. Even though she was 160, she still had the body of a child. Now, she had grown more than 10 centimeters taller. Although she was still an airport runway, there was still a huge difference between a woman and a child. Rong Lei slowly caressed her face, her short hair, and her gray shirt. His gaze remained gentle. Qinshan didn't refuse either. Her entire being was immersed in a faint sadness. His appearance wasn't a pleasant surprise, but rather it brought her back to the moment when he jumped off the building. She looked at him and finally reached out to touch his face with a trembling hand. It was warm, a living Rong Lei. Qinshan's heart seemed to become alive. Her lips moved, and she called his name. Rong Lei, I'm here, Qinshan. He placed his palm on the back of her hand and stared at her. At this moment, they seemed to have returned to the past together. Rong Lei lowered his head and gently kissed her lips. Her lips were warm and soft, while his was slightly cold. Chapter 28:09. As he kissed Qinshan, she pressed her fingers on his shoulder. This was actually a rejection, and how could Rong Lei not know that? His dark eyes were deep, and his palms slowly moved to her chin. With a little force, she naturally opened her mouth, and he took the opportunity to kiss her. Qinshan closed her eyes slightly. She recalled the past. When she was 12 years old, there was only Rong Lei in her world. She thought that she should be able to accept it. The man that she had loved for so many years was kissing her now. She should have feelings. She hugged his neck and tried to kiss him back. This kiss was gentle and lingering, but there were no ripples. At least, she didn't feel her heart racing, nor did she feel like she couldn't wait to find a bed like when she kissed Lanyu. Everything was lukewarm. It was far from her wild imagination when she was a young girl. But obviously, Rong Lei was satisfied. His breathing was messy, and his forehead was pressed against hers. His voice was a little hoarse. Qinshan, I want you very much. Are you ready? Qinshan opened her eyes and looked at him. After a long time, she gently shook her head. No. Rong Lei smiled, a very gentle smile. He reached out and rubbed her short hair. I won't force you. With that, he got up. I'm going to the bathroom to take a shower. Let's have dinner later. Qinshan looked at him and smiled. But Rong Lei didn't seem to be satisfied with her reaction. He lowered his head and said in a very low voice, Aren't you going to ask me why I'm going to the bathroom? Qinshan had been in love before, so she naturally knew. But at this time, she was flirting with him and pretended that she didn't understand. She shook her head. Rong Lei kissed the corner of her mouth. Because I have to solve it. The man's unique aura, his words, and the fact that he was only wearing swimming trunks at this time was really seductive. Qinshan felt that his self-control was very good. He was actually able to smile faintly. Okay. Rong Lei bit the corner of her mouth. Next time, I won't let you go. Compared to him, she seemed a little dull. Before he left, Qinshan couldn't help but think. Based on Rong Lei's behavior, he should have had a woman before, and it wouldn't have been a short period of time. A man who had never been in contact with a woman would not behave so freely. Besides, They had not seen each other for more than 10 years. They should be very unfamiliar with each other, but he was not. Qin Shun pursed his lips, drank the juice, and rinsed the taste in his mouth. She didn't know why, but she wasn't used to this smell. Ronglei was very clean, but she felt that Lan Yu's smoky breath made her heart beat faster, and it could stimulate her feminine side. Qin Shun patted his face and smiled bitterly. Qin Shun, you must be crazy. You and Lan Yu are over. The one you have always liked is Ronglei. Now he is back, and he is alive and well. Ronglei quickly came out of the bathroom. He had changed into a gray shirt and black trousers, and he looked very handsome. Qin Shun was stunned. She felt that it was a little strange to look at him, as if he was looking at her. Ronglei held her hand and walked to the front hall. He turned his head and smiled. Qin Shun, what are you thinking about? Qin Shun stood still, and Ronglei followed. Qin Shun looked at him and asked softly, do you care about me now? Chapter 28:10. Ronglei looked at her and smiled. I like you no matter what you become. Then, he hugged her and rested his chin on her hair. Qin Shun, I'm back. I won't leave you again. I won't make you sad again, okay? She stood there and let him hug her. The setting sun shone on the man and woman who were hugging each other, and it looked particularly beautiful. The dinner was very sumptuous. Before that, Ronglei played a song for her. He played very well. Qin Shun sat there and listened attentively. After a long time, Qin Shun knew why she couldn't find the same feelings for Ronglei. All these years, she lived for him, lived in his way for 12 years, and turned herself into him. How could she fall in love with her other self? After Ronglei finished the song, he took a rose and put it in front of her. At the same time, he leaned over and kissed her cheek. For my girl. Qin Shun turned her head. I thought you would say, for your boy. Ronglei looked at her and smiled. Qin Shun, as long as it's you, I don't care. She was in a trance. She reached out to touch her own face and said in a low voice, even if my generation is like this, wearing a man's shirt, without makeup, without a dress, and with a man's identity, don't you care? I don't care. He held her hand and took out a plain platinum ring from his pocket. If you want, we could be together now. Qin Shun withdrew her fingers and said softly, it's too fast, Ronglei. I haven't thought about it yet. He hugged her from behind and kissed her ear. Stay tonight and let me persuade you. His meaning was very obvious. He wanted her to stay for the night. Qin Shun looked down and put her fingers on the back of his hand on her waist. It's too fast. After saying that, she gently pushed his hand away. This was the second time today that she rejected him. Ronglei's eyes darkened as he smiled. All right, I'll wait. He kissed her again before walking to the other side to eat with her. It was a luxurious dinner with silver candlesticks and a row of servants waiting behind him. She had seen all of this before, and the Qin family could afford it. However, in recent years, the life of the Qin family had been simple. Most of the time, it was the men who cooked. Qin Shun was used to that kind of warmth, so he was not used to such luxury. She had forgotten that when she was young, she had liked Ronglei precisely because of his style and the way he was always dignified. Ronglei raised his goblet. To our reunion. Qin also raised his glass. I may not be able to drink. Is it because of your profession? Ronglei was very considerate. Qin nodded. Ronglei gestured for the servant to bring a glass of fruit juice. I've neglected Qin. There was a flash of pride in his eyes. I'm happy for you, Qin. Qin smiled. In the past, I wanted to save people because I didn't want to see anyone die. Lan Yu frowned and looked guilty. I'm sorry, Qin. I made you sad. It's been so long. Qin shook his head. Besides, you're back. Ronglei smiled. Yes. Then, he ate elegantly. Qin ate some. Although it was delicious, she didn't eat much. Chapter 28:11. No. Qin wiped his lips, leaned back in his chair, and said calmly, I'm just used to simple food, such as coffee and rice. Simple food is fine. Her eyes fell on the feast in front of her. Eating this every day, maybe, she smiled apologetically. Ronglei, you really might get indigestion. Ronlei walked over and leaned over. Next time, take me to your favorite restaurant, okay? Before Qin could say anything, he continued, Chun, I want to know about your life. Qin was stunned and said slowly, Then do you want to know about my past? Yes, but I will respect your privacy. Ronlei appeared to be very elegant. After he finished speaking, he looked at her with a burning gaze. Qin, do you want to know about my present? He put her hand on his heart. His meaning was very obvious. He wanted to spend a night with her, and even the night after that. Qin clenched her hand, stood up, and said with a faint smile, I'll take you to the restaurant I often go to. Ronlei's gaze swept over the feast on the table. His dark eyes darkened, and a faint smile slowly appeared on his face. Okay, she had to go home eventually. He knew very well that it was just a refusal. She was here with him, but her heart was obviously not with him. She fell in love with a man named Lanyu. She was no longer the girl from 12 years ago, but she didn't understand her own heart. Ronlei clenched his fingers. She actually fell in love with a man like that, a man who gave up on her so easily. His handsome face slightly tightened, and he held her hand so hard that it hurt her. Qin endured it and didn't say anything. She didn't find her voice until they were in the car. You drive yourself? What else? Do you want someone to follow you when you're in love? Ronlei buckled his seatbelt and smiled. Qin didn't say anything more. He guided her to a shop she would go to. She didn't eat over there. Instead, she ordered 2 portions, one for her and one for him. Ronlei put down, looked at her, and asked very seriously, Do I eat at your place, or go back to eat? Qin thought about it seriously. You should eat at home. I'm a little sad. Ronlei looked at her and started the car. After that, he didn't speak to her anymore. After a long time, Qin tugged at his sleeve. Are you angry? No, he said flatly. Qin said without thinking. Actually, you can show your anger. That will make you look more real. Qin, are you saying that I'm not real? Ronlei casually said, Actually, you could be a little more real in front of me. What? Qin's voice was a little light. Ronlei didn't answer and sent her all the way back to the apartment. When she unbuckled her seatbelt, he held her down. He turned his head and looked at her quietly. Qin said, Thank you for sending me back. Ronlei looked at her. Is that all you have to say to me? Before Qin could speak, he asked, After so many years, Chun, do you still love me? He said he loved her, not liked her. Many years ago, she was too young to confess, but they were in love at that time. Chapter 28:12. Now that he suddenly asked, it seemed a little abrupt. At least, that was what her expression showed. Qin's expression was a little complicated. She looked at him for a long time before she spoke, as though she had thought about it carefully. However, any words that had been thought through were usually embellished. He didn't really want to hear it, so he stopped her. Qin, it's getting late. Let's go upstairs. Qin wanted to say something, but stopped herself. In the end, she opened the car door and took her portion of coffee and rice. She took 2 steps and came back to stand by his side. Ronlei rolled down the car window, revealing half of his handsome face. Qin went over and kissed the corner of his mouth. She said in a low voice, I will slowly find the memories that belong to us. Her voice became even lower. Ronlei, I've been like this for a long time. It's been a long time since I could find the feelings of the past. All that's left are memories, just thoughts of you. Her voice was elegant, like the sky, full of suns, easily pulling them back to the past. When she said that, he pulled her over. Qin, we have so many beautiful memories. You will definitely find them. I will wait for you. She nodded, lifted her body, and smiled at him. Then she ran to the apartment. Ronlei watched as she disappeared into the elevator. Then he got out of the car and took out the curry rice. He looked at the takeaway, which was filled with that man's aura. He knew that she had eaten with that man before, so they were familiar with each other. His mornings had always been exquisite. She would never eat such food in the past. He wanted to slowly change her and bring her back to his world, not lose her way like she was now. In the end, the takeaway was thrown into the trash can. Qin came out of the elevator. When she looked up, her vision went black and her body hit the wall. In front of her was a hot body. The owner of that body reeked of alcohol, and his temperature was frighteningly high. She was stunned and pushed him away. Lanyu, are you crazy? Lanyu took a few steps back, looking disheveled. He lowered his eyes and looked at her. His gaze was very, very cold, with a hint of mockery. Come back from the dead? Old Qin. Qin Shun, should I congratulate you? Qin Shun took out his card and wanted to open the door, but his body was hugged from behind. The card in her hand was broken into two halves. If you don't make things clear today, don't even think about leaving. Qin Shun struggled but failed, so he closed his eyes slightly. What do you want to clarify? We made it clear when Lin Cece was on your bed. Lanyu stared into her eyes. That was a trap. Do you believe it? Lin Cece and Rong Lei know each other. She did it on purpose. Qin Shun frowned. That's not what you said when you hugged Lin Cece, who was only wearing her underwear. With that said, she smiled. Lanyu, let go. We're not compatible. Her words still angered him. He hugged her in his arms and bit her earlobe from behind, saying angrily, Are you compatible with that pretty boy then? He looks like he's impotent. Can he satisfy you like I do? Can he make you cry and scream in pleasure? He had just finished speaking when he received a slap on his face. Chapter 28:13. Lanyu glared at her, and his voice was even colder than hers. Really? Call the police? He pressed her against the wall and narrowed his eyes. I've fucked you so many times. Why didn't you call the police? Instead, you hugged me and told me to be harder and faster. Huh? What he said made Qin Shun feel extremely embarrassed. She pursed her lips and glared at him. Lanyu, be rational. Be rational. He punched the wall again, and the wound that hadn't healed last time burst open again. Blood splashed everywhere. Qin Shun almost thought that his hand was going to be crippled. Her body was pressed against the wall, and she didn't move at all. Lanyu put one hand on the wall, leaned forward, and said coldly, My woman has been with another man, and you're asking me to be rational? Qin Shun felt that he was crazy, so she restrained her voice and said, Can you be reasonable? I'm not. His voice suddenly became hoarse. Qin, why should I be reasonable? As he said that, he held her face with his bloody palm and kissed her. In fact, Qin Shun could have pushed him away, but she was afraid that she would really cripple his hand, so she gritted her teeth and didn't let him in. However, the man in a rage was terrifyingly savage. He kissed her desperately, and she refused, so he pinched her chin and forced her to open her mouth. This kiss was brutal and direct, with a touch of blood. That dense aura was like a dose of the strongest village medicine, sweeping over them. Gradually, the kiss changed, and several buttons on Qin Shun's shirt were undone. The fire of passion spread. About 5 minutes later, Qin Shun grabbed Lanyu's hair and let out a long breath. Let go. He moved away a little, but he didn't completely leave. Instead, he put his chin on her shoulder and murmured, Qin Shun, you're very cruel. You gave me so much hope, but you threw me away just like that. Qin Shun turned his face away. We're not suitable for each other. I can't get over what happened that day. Lanyu let go of her at this time and took 2 steps back. His voice was a little hoarse. The one you can't get past is not Lin Cece, but Rong Lei. He suddenly laughed, and it was a somewhat desolate laugh. Qin Shun, you still love him, don't you? Your heart has always been him, and I'm just a joke when you're bored. I'm not even a substitute. He took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. He looked at her and laughed at himself. How can a person like me be a substitute for your idol? As Lanyu spoke, he pinched the cigarette butt and blew a ring of smoke right on her face. He did it on purpose, and Qin Shun only felt sad. She turned her little face away and said very softly, Lanyu, you should start your new life. New life. He laughed. Yes, it's time to start a new life. You said that your relative named Huang Yasi is not bad. I might as well marry her. I don't want to be your husband, but it's not bad to be your cousin-in-law. Qin Shun opened her eyes wide and stared at him. Lanyu, you bastard. She reached out and wanted to slap him, but her arm was caught in the air by him. He said softly, Don't make me angry, or I'll really provoke her. Qin Shen's eyes were already wet. Chapter 28:14. Her tone was very agitated, and her body was also madly in love with him. However, Lan Yu did not move. He sneered. Qin Shen, do you really think that I am a man who will be happy after venting my beast jade? His voice was even colder. Why would I want a woman who has other men in her heart? As he spoke, he pressed the button for the elevator and walked in without looking at her again. Blood was dripping down from his arm. Qin Shen looked at the blood and felt like her heart was being eaten away. She stood there for a very, very long time. She felt that Lan Yu was the man who could arouse her desire, but Ron Lei was not. Putting Lan Yu aside, did she really want to be with Ron Lei? Qin Shen was at a loss for a moment. When she was young, she liked Ron Lei, and it was even an unforgettable love. But after all these years, it wasn't that she didn't feel that the love had faded, turning into a memory. Perhaps it was just a memory, and liking him was just a habit. Subconsciously, she still looked at him with the eyes of a 12-year-old girl. However, she was not a 12-year-old anymore. She was a mature woman who stood at the top and had seen all kinds of outstanding men. Ron Lei was still extraordinarily honorable, but she always felt that something was missing. After a very long time, Qin Shen found out that it was because Ron Lei had no flesh and blood. Although honorable, it was too far away. There was no sense of reality. Qin Shen stood there and looked at him quietly for a long time before returning to her apartment. She walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her red lips were red and swollen, and there was a row of blue and purple finger marks on her collarbone. It looked shocking. Qin Shen pursed her lips and used water to wash her lips and the marks on her collarbone. However, no matter how she rubbed it, she could not get rid of the smell. She only needed to close her eyes to remember the way he kissed her. Qin Shen suddenly opened his eyes and let out a long breath. No, she couldn't think about it anymore. She had broken up with Lan Yu. Right now, she should be with Ron Lei. She would try her best to fall in love with him again. She turned on the hot water and soaked herself in the bathtub. She was so tired she fell asleep. She dreamed of the year when she was 12 years old in France. In the endless sea of sunflowers, Ron Lei walked towards her with a smile on his face. He had a beautiful smile, the most beautiful boy she had ever seen. Seeing him smile, Qin Shen also smiled. She watched as he walked toward her. Her eyes were filled with countless little stars. It was a gaze that only appeared when she was looking at her lover. Suddenly, Ron Lei's good-looking and sunny face turned into a skeleton. That skeleton even had a terrifying and strange smile on its face. Qin Shen woke up with a start. When he woke up, his forehead was covered in hot sweat, but his body was cold. She touched it with her hand. It turned out that the water had turned cold. She got up and went to take a hot shower. However, she still caught a cold. Her nose was running and she was sneezing. At that moment, she felt hungry and remembered that she had a serving of coffee and rice that she had not eaten. She heated it up casually. When she opened it, she smelled the delicious aroma. She was instantly healed. Qin Shen had a big appetite. He finished it in one go. Then he took the toilet paper and crawled into bed. Although he did not turn on the air conditioner, his body was cold the whole night. Chapter 28:15. In the middle of the night, she turned over, but she still could not fall asleep. In the end, she sat up and leaned against the headboard. She did not know if she was missing someone's body temperature. She only knew that when that person was around, if she caught a cold, she would be treated as a princess. Qin Shen thought about it and felt that he was a little ridiculous. Since when did he become so pretentious? While Qin Shen could not fall asleep in a luxurious villa, Ron Lei held a glass of red wine in his hand and stood by the window. In the dark night, only a small light was turned on in the hall. The light around him was dim, and his tall body was hidden in the darkness, making him look even more ghostly. Anna stood behind him for a long time. Finally, she stepped forward and hugged him from behind. She murmured, "Master, do you need me to serve you tonight?" Ron Lei did not move. He only asked calmly, "How's the matter I asked you to arrange?" Anna's fingers were nimble to please him. Her voice was more like a sigh. It's all arranged. I'll get the news in a while. Rong Lei pushed her away. His tall body slowly walked to a set of Italian sofas and sat down. Anna understood what he meant and followed him. She knelt in front of him and worshipped him, using all kinds of ways to please him. She continued until her master was satisfied. Of course, such a unilateral action took a very long time. After a full hour, her master groaned and then pushed her away. Anna was still kneeling there. She carefully cleaned up her master with a tissue and then looked at her master charmingly. Rong Lei said calmly, "Sit here." Anna was a little surprised. It was obvious that her master wanted to give her some charity tonight. She got up carefully and sat down even more carefully. She did not dare to kiss his lips. She only dared to kiss his chin. Rong Lei's slender and beautiful jade-like fingers pinched her face. There was no warmth. It was as if he was treating the lowest class of women. However, it was enough to make Anna ecstatic. She was so excited that it was as if she was celebrating the end of the world. Her master, on the other hand, was as calm as a machine. He did not show any emotion at all, as if he was giving a bone to a loyal dog. Just as they were about to part from each other, there was a knock on the door. A man in black came in and handed a player to Rong Lei. He acted as if he didn't see what was happening between the man and the woman. Perhaps he was already used to it. Rong Lei opened it, and Anna opened it by herself like a snake. The screen in Rong Lei's hand showed the scene of Lan Yu and Qin Shen kissing crazily at the door. Qin Shen took the initiative to kiss Lan Yu. Rong Lei's fingers tightened, and the thing in his hand shattered into powder. Then, the woman on his body was thrown to the ground like a rag. Anna's forehead was covered in sweat as she called out to her master. The man in black replaced Rong Lei and covered Anna's body in such a big space. The warm sounds of a man and a woman in love were heard again. And Rong Lei, after an hour, stood opposite Qin Shen's apartment. The lights in the apartment were not turned off. He saw Qin Shen eating alone. He knew that the man brought her to eat that kind of food. That was why she treasured it so much. Rong Lei's eyes flashed with coldness. A man like that should never have appeared in this world. As long as that man disappeared, his Chun Shan would slowly fall in love with him. Chapter 28:16. The next day, Qin Shan saw the news of Lan Yu's accident on the social news. The news reported that the CEO of the Grand Hyatt hotel chain had unfortunately been involved in a car accident this morning. His condition was unknown, and he had been sent to Xingyuan Hospital for emergency treatment. Emergency treatment? Qin Shen put down the milk in her hand and was stunned for a moment. Then, she immediately went back to her room to put on a shirt. She didn't even change out of her slippers before she went downstairs and drove to the hospital. The entrance of Xingyuan Hospital was blocked by reporters. They were probably fighting for this news. Qin Shen didn't have to go through the underground parking lot to get in. She went straight to the emergency room. She thought that she would see Lan Yu lying like a rag like the last time. Otherwise, he would have a fracture or something. She was anxious because he was her patient. She didn't want anything to happen to him. Qin Shen rushed over. Qin Mu, who was at the door, saw her and instinctively stopped her. Qin Shen, Lan Yu, what's wrong with him? Qin Shan said as she opened the door. However, the situation inside still made her a little dumbfounded. Lan Yu was inside, but her distant cousin, Huang Xia, was also inside. To be precise, she was kissing Lan Yu. It was a kind of reluctant kiss. Huang Xia's cheeks were deeply sunk in, and her face was red. It was obvious that she had never been kissed by a man like this before. Qin Shen's face was a little pale. She just watched as Lan Yu kissed someone else in front of her. Actually, it wasn't the first time, but her heart still felt numb. It was very uncomfortable. She didn't know how long she watched. It was about a minute, but it also seemed like an hour. She only knew that when she left, her face didn't look too good. Qin Mu closed the door and said softly, I came for a prenatal checkup and happened to see this. Qin Shen, have you really made up your mind? Qin Mu had always felt that Rong Lei's appearance was very strange. How could a person who had been dead for so many years come back to life just like that? However, it was not convenient for her to tell Qin Shen about this at the moment. She couldn't figure it out. Since Rong Lei was still alive and liked Qin Shun, why didn't he appear earlier but let her suffer for so many years? This kind of love, is it love? Perhaps there was love and possessiveness, but it was not pure. Qin Shun looked at Qin Mu in a daze. After a while, he laughed hoarsely and said, "Yes, I've decided. I'm even more certain now." Last night, he said that he was with Huang Xia. She thought that he wouldn't embarrass her like this, but after just one night, he was hugging her cousin and kissing her. Should she be happy for him or sad for herself? Qin Shun lowered his eyes. "Mumu, I'll go back first." She looked up again. "Where's Zhou Chengwang? I'm worried about you, so I'll take you to my office." Qin Mu held her hand and said, "Qin Shun, I'm fine." She looked at Qin Shun and said, "I also have something to say to you." Qin Shun's eyes were a little blank. After a while, he nodded. Just as they were about to leave, Huang Xia came out of the emergency room. Her face was bright red, and her red lips were slightly swollen. She looked like she had been completely loved. She looked at Qin Shun and smiled very carefully. "Qin Shun, can you take a look at Lan Yu's leg?" Qin Shun looked at her and didn't say anything. At this moment, Qin Mu couldn't help but say, "Xia, don't go too far. Go and call another doctor." Chapter 28:17. Huang Xia looked at Qin Shun carefully and said in a low voice, "Qin Shun, do you blame me for taking Lan Yu away?" Qin Shun looked at her. Huang Xia cried like a pear blossom in the rain. Qin Mu rolled her eyes. She used to think that this cousin was a good person, but she didn't expect that she was a complete drama queen. She pursed her lips and looked at Qin Shun. Qin Shun had always been sharp-tongued. She didn't know if he would say something nicer this time. Sure enough, Qin Shun was unhappy and said something unpleasant. "Yes, I blame you. So, are you going to give him back to me?" This result was not what Huang Xia wanted to hear, and she didn't expect it. She thought that since she and Qin Shun were cousins, Qin Shun wouldn't put down his pride and say something so unpleasant. Huang Xia was also born in a high family, so she couldn't accept it for a while. Her eyes were full of tears, but she held them back for a long time. That look, the pear blossom in the rain, was very lovable. However, Qin Shun wasn't in the mood. She looked at Qin Mu and said, "Let's go." Qin Mu didn't care about Huang Xia. Before they became real sisters, cousin and cousin were all fleeting clouds. "You bully my Qin Shun. Go away. Who cares about your little feelings?" Huang Xia watched Qin Shun and Qin Mu leave and didn't care about her. For a moment, she felt embarrassed. She didn't think she was wrong. Qin Shun had broken up with Lan Yu and was with another man. Why couldn't she be with Lan Yu? Yes, she kissed Lan Yu first. Lan Yu just didn't push her away after seeing Qin Shun. She knew that even though she minded it, she wasn't willing to let go of such an opportunity. As long as she could be with Lan Yu, she didn't care. Moreover, she was confident that she could defeat Qin Shun. She didn't dare to say for others, but Qin Shun always appeared as a man, so she was confident. She turned around and saw Lan Yu standing behind her. His gaze was deep and serene. Huang Xia was stunned and carefully asked, "You heard everything? Hear what?" His voice was a little lazy. "Don't provoke Qin Shun again. I don't like meddlesome women." Huang Xia immediately understood what he meant. She was pleasantly surprised and covered her face. "Lan Yu, really?" Lan Yu's gaze was somewhat indifferent. "Let's give it a try." Right now, he wanted to find a woman who liked him and loved him, because always chasing after a woman's footsteps was too tiring. Huang Xia walked up slowly and reached out to touch his good-looking chin. "Am I dreaming?" "Ms. Huang, where's your modesty?" Lan Yu smiled faintly, but there wasn't a trace of a smile in his eyes. There was even a little emptiness. He looked into the distance, in the direction where Qin Shun had left. He instinctively knew that he chose Huang Xia not because Huang Xia loved him, but because Huang Xia and Qin Shun were relatives, and he could still see Qin Shun. A self-deprecating smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. In Qin Shun's office, Qin Shun placed Qin Mu on the sofa and slowly made coffee. Qin Mu watched her pour cup after cup of coffee and finally couldn't help but say, "I'm pregnant and can't drink coffee." "Qin Shun, have you forgotten?" Chen seemed to have just woken up. He pursed his lips and said, "Oh, sorry. I was a little distracted." Chapter 28:18. Qin Shun was slightly stunned. "Lan Yu, isn't he?" Qin Mu's voice was faint. "You came here so early in the morning because you were afraid that something would happen to him. You saw him with Sia, and you were so distracted." Qin Mu asked directly, "Chun Shun, did you break up with him?" Qin lowered his eyes. "I broke up with him. It's all clear." She paused again. "I'm already with Rong Lei." Isn't he also with Sia?" Qin Mu walked up to her, threw the coffee cup in her hand aside, and looked at her seriously. "What about your heart? Who is in your heart? Can you tell me?" Qin smiled. "I don't know, but I want to try with Rong Lei now." Qin Mu held her hand tightly. "Rong Lei is very dangerous, I know." Qin Shun murmured. "He came to me, and he won't leave without a result. And I also want to know if I still have feelings for him." Perhaps this was a dangerous game, but being with Rong Lei was the safest. This was Qin Chen's instinct. Qin Mu was a little stunned for a moment. Qin Chen looked at her and smiled. "Mumu, we are twins. I know what you are thinking." Qin Mu touched her forehead and smiled. She patted Qin Shun and said, "What a terrible telepathy." Qin Shun reached out and hugged her, then squatted down and put his face on Qin Mu's belly. "I will take good care of myself. Don't worry." Qin Mu nodded. "I'm relieved that you know what to do." She lowered her head and reached out to touch Qin Shen's face. Only she could touch Qin Shen's face so unscrupulously. The scene was very beautiful. When Zhou Chongwang came in, he saw his wife and his brother-in-law hugging each other lovingly. His heart was in a mess. Although Qin Shan was a woman, he looked no different from a man. Moreover, he was so intimate with his wife. Zhou Zong was jealous, seriously jealous. He slowly closed the door. "Mumu." Qin Mu looked at her husband and saw the unknown meaning in his eyes. She stuck out her tongue. What a childish man. How could he be jealous of Qin Shun? However, she still obediently let go of Qin Shun and asked her to go with her. Qin Shun agreed, but at that moment, Mr. Lin's secretary came over and said that Mr. Lin wasn't feeling well and asked Qin Shun to go over and take a look. Qin Shun motioned for him to wait outside and looked at Qin Mu gently. "Go home and rest." "I'm fine." She winked at Zhou Chongwang. Zhou Chongwang understood. He helped his little wife to the door and said in a low voice, "Qin Shun can handle it. Don't worry." Qin Mu left first. She had been pregnant recently and always wanted to sleep. After watching them leave, Qin Shun said to Mr. Lin's secretary, "Go." With that, he put on his white robe, put his hand in his pocket, and followed the secretary. Mr. Lin's problem was not serious. He was just a little depressed. After checking him, Qin Shun smiled faintly. "It's not a big problem. He can't lie in bed all the time. He needs to move around. It's best to climb the stairs." Mrs. Lin looked worried. "How can I do that? He hasn't recovered yet." Chapter 28:19. Madame Lin looked at her husband with a worried expression. "Dr. Qin, we know you don't have Sheng Yuan system. You can follow old Lin there. He won't mistreat you." Before Qin Shin could speak, she continued, "Old Lin can give you the same treatment in New York, even better than there." Qin Shin smiled. "Thank you for your kindness, madam. I prefer to live a carefree life. Besides, the laboratory over there is also mine. I don't have much research to do. I'm afraid I'll let Mr. Lin down." Mr. Lin patted his wife's shoulder and said calmly, "Everyone has their own ambitions. Don't make things difficult for little Qin. No matter what, I'm indebted to little Qin. Take good care of Cece and don't let her mess around again." Qin Shin was a girl, so she couldn't mess around. If word got out, her reputation would be ruined. The Lin family couldn't afford to lose face like this, and they would let little Qin down. Mr. Lin was clear about this. Madame Lin nodded. "I will. Don't worry." Qin Shin now understood that Xiong Lei was fake. Once again, he tried to convince her to follow Mr. Lin to work for him. She also knew that Mr. Lin was kind to her because she had cured him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let her off so easily. Qin Shin left first. Before she left, she said a few polite words. With the Lin family's status, It was always good to be polite. As soon as she left, Madame Lin sighed. If only Dr. Cheen was a man. No matter what, he would help Cece win him over. As soon as she said this, Mr. Lin said, if he was a man, he would like Cece. Madame Lin didn't speak for a long time. Mr. Lin's voice was a bit low. The most important thing for a husband and wife is a good relationship. Nothing else is important. As he said this, Madame Lin's eyes became a bit red. All these years you've been busy. I've been taking care of Cece alone. Are you blaming me for being so willful now? Mr. Lin looked at his wife and sighed. How could that be? I can't help it now. This time, you have to take care of Cece and make her follow us. She can't mess around anymore. He sighed again. You saw the newcomer, Rong Lei. Mr. Lin had a pensive look on his face. Tell Cece not to touch this person. I heard from Secretary Zhang that she saw Cece and Rong Lei meeting a few days ago. This man is very dangerous, and, as a last resort, he ordered people to tie her up and board the plane. Do you understand? Madame Lin frowned. Rong Lei, Dr. Cheen used to like her. She has been dead for 12 years. Now she's alive and has a prominent identity. Mr. Lin said softly, it's very possible that this person has connections with politics, especially with the West. If Cece is involved with him, will I still be able to be the minister? It took Madame Lin a long time to digest the information. She said with difficulty, doesn't Dr. Cheen like Mr. Lon? They seem to be fine. Then you have to ask your precious daughter what she has done. Mr. Lin was infuriated at the mention of this. However, Mr. Lin knew his daughter's whereabouts better than Madame Lin. Madame Lin was shocked. After a long time, she said, what did Cece do? Mr. Lin's voice was slightly cold. She ran to Lan Yu's house and climbed into his bed. Then Cece and Lan Yu had sex? Madame Lin was shocked. Mr. Lin snorted. Not yet. She doesn't have that kind of charm. Chapter 2820. In the villa, a tall man stood by the window with a glass of red wine in his hand. Anna stood behind him and whispered, I'm sorry, master. We failed this time. Rong Lei turned around and stared at Anna with his dark eyes. Where is he? In the hospital. Anna lowered her head. There are too many people. We can't make another move. Also, I think Lan Yu is already on his guard. It might be difficult to make another move. Rong Lei drank the red wine in the glass in one gulp and said faintly, then let him live for a while longer, and let him know Chun is mine, and he will lose miserably. This was a battle between males. Since he didn't die this time, he would let him live a little longer. Rong Lei asked again, where's Cheen? Anna hesitated. She went to the hospital. Almost immediately, the glass in Rong Lei's hand shattered. The red liquid stained his hand, resembling the color of fresh blood. Anna hurried to clean it up for him, but Rong Lei waved her away. Go find all the information on that man. He didn't think much of Lan Yu before, but it was obvious that his Chun couldn't help but fall in love with him. He wanted to see what was so special about this Lan Yu that Chun cared about and liked. Anna acted quickly. Within half an hour, she had gathered all the information and sent it to Rong Lei. Then, she poured Rong Lei another glass of red wine. Rong Lei savored the fragrant wine as he looked at the information. His gaze turned gloomy. Lan Yu, a genius student, entered an Ivy League university at the age of 20 to study economics. However, for some reason, he changed his major to oil painting. After graduation, he was still very famous in New York. Rong Lei flipped to the last few pages and his expression darkened. Lan Yu had only taken over the Grand Hyatt Hotel a few months ago, and the hotel's performance had increased by 200%. What kind of man was he? Rong Lei put down the documents, sat on the sofa, and looked at the sky of B City. Then, he whispered, find something for Lan Yu to do. Don't let him be so idle. Anna nodded and quickly left. Over the next few days, there were several incidents of accidental casualties in the Grand U Group's hotels across the country. For a time, the direction of society was very unfavorable to Grand U Group. Lan Yu naturally became a flying man, flying here and there to deal with matters. At the same time, He also held a few internal meetings to increase the security of the hotel to an unprecedented level. While Lan Yu was flying out of town, Qin Shun came to the villa. Anna brought her to the second floor. Qin Shun sat down in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked outside. The view from this corner was very good. She could almost imagine that Rong Lei probably liked to sit here. It was very much in line with his personality. Qin Shun looked down and suddenly felt a little unfamiliar. She didn't know if it was because they hadn't seen each other for too long, or because she had never understood him. Rong Lei walked out in a bathrobe. He must have taken a shower, and there was a faint smell of shower gel on his body. It smelled very good and very fresh. He walked over and gave Qin Shun a polite kiss. "You're here." Qin Shun smiled and looked at him sitting opposite her. She was just about to speak when the servant brought over 2 sets of breakfast. Rong Lei smiled. "Chun, let's have breakfast together." Qin Shun forced a smile. "I've eaten the curry rice from that restaurant." Rong Lei smiled. "It's very good. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.